Wife's shocking fantasies after tragic accident revealed. 2 decades of marriage makes the couple quite close. Dana and I were exactly like that. I loved the way her body responded to my touch, and she tried to keep herself in shape. She always dressed well, not what you would call risque, but rather conservative and attractive. We both looked like we fit into a fairly affluent middle-class lifestyle, which we were. Side by side, we ran our own businesses and lived almost as one person. At 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighing only 110 pounds, Dana looked a dozen years younger than her years, and the best description of her appearance would be that she was a bit of a fox. I had seen many men cast long glances at her, but it didn't bother me in the least. On the contrary, I swelled with pride. Her breasts are large enough to be obvious but not heavy. Her waist is slim and muscular, and her hips are femininely swollen. Dana is keenly aware of being noticed, and truth be told, I know she enjoys it too. But she belongs to me completely, and since she's rarely more than 20 feet away from me, I know for a fact that she's completely faithful. Our sex life together is also completely normal. We don't have any schedule. We make love whenever we're in the mood. It usually happens at home and in private, except for one time when we were traveling and it was close to midnight. Dana leaned against me. It was still about 100 miles from home and she was rubbing my leg, a sign I recognize. I gave her a wicked grin and we pulled off to the side of the freeway. My mistake was leaving my blinkers on for safety. I didn't want us to get run over. I pulled Dana's breasts out of her blouse when the car was suddenly flooded with light. Dana quickly covered herself up, and I struggled to pull my pants back up, which wasn't easy to do with the steering wheel in the way. Oh, and the gear shift lever, too. We were in our wonderful 2-seater Corvette. Glancing over my shoulder at the window, I saw the shadow of a policeman standing there. "I saw your blinkers, so I had to check out the situation, sorry, sir," he told me. Мы только что стали друзьями. I managed to stammer unconvincingly. "I can see that, but I'm going to have to ask you to leave it until you get where you're going." "Okay. Sorry." "No problem, sir. But I will say that I don't blame you for anything." He grinned briefly and walked away. "That was embarrassing," said Dana, buttoning her clothes and lifting her hips to put her underwear back in place. "God, I wonder how much he's seen," said I. "I think he'd recognize us both naked and masked." She laughed. We both roared at that. We managed to get to the house and started tearing at each other's clothes almost before the door slammed shut. You'd think we'd put 2 and 2 together, maybe talk about it or even do an experiment, but we didn't. We just went back to normal. It was just a moment in our lives. Then came the day of the accident. "It was just a little bump." That's exactly what the old lady said as she stepped out of the tiny white hatchback. "Oh my God, it was just a little bump," she screamed again, clasping her hands to her face with a shocked expression. "That was the stupidest thing I've ever seen from a human being," I shouted at her. It wasn't at all in my nature to yell at someone, but I was scared for Dana and furious that a woman had jumped on her like that so suddenly. I crossed the strip of grass and the sidewalk and got to my wife Dana in probably only 4 strides, and she was lying on her side by the back of the car, not moving. I felt a cold chill run through me. As we reached our car, parked facing the street, I saw Dana waving from the other side. Just then, a tiny white car drove past, not stopping to let her pass. I didn't make a move, climbing into the car and tossing the mail on the passenger seat for her to pour through, as we'd done 1,000 times before. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught movement to my right and looked up just in time to see a tiny car begin to rapidly reverse. Turning my head, I saw Dana halfway across the near lane looking to the right. My world froze in slow motion as I hit the klaxon to warn her, but instead hit the airbag. We were driving Dana's car that day. Hers had the klaxon at the bottom of the airbag, and my van had it on the sides, so nothing happened. I had already managed to open the door when the car collided and Dana's body flipped over onto her back and her legs were picked up by the sloping back of the car. Her body was carried a short distance. Then the driver realized what was happening and hit the brakes, throwing Dana into the air. I watched as she flew through the air like a rag doll, dropping to her right side, then bounced up and landed on her left side. Her head came down hard and up, hitting not the hard pavement, but her purse, which fluttered around her because of the strap around her neck. It cushioned the blow. That thing probably saved her life. Then I ran, screaming at the top of my lungs. Dana lay quietly as my long, unused military training kicked in. I knelt down and checked her mouth and nose for bloody bubbles, a sure sign of lung damage. There were no bloody bubbles from her mouth and nose, a sure sign of lung damage. There was a scratch above her eye, and I checked her arms and legs for fractures. Then I heard sirens. The emergency services were only a block away, at a small-town firehouse. Someone had already brought a warm blanket, which I spread over her and gently wrapped her up. Dana woke up and spoke, complaining that her head and back hurt. Her words were curt, slurred. A surgical team of 4 young men quickly loaded her onto a stretcher and headed for a major city nearly 40 miles away. By then, I had already grabbed my digital camera and snapped a few pictures, knowing there would be repercussions. I headed to our car and followed. Halfway to the hospital, I caught up with an ambulance, probably scaring a few drivers on the highway as I drove by with my blinkers on, and then followed them right into the parking lot. "You can't come in here, sir." The woman stood in front of me. "No, I can. I'm her husband," I said as I whizzed past her. The woman started to say something but gave up, and by then, we were walking down the hallway. Every instinct in my body was talking about holding her back, but the doorway was flooded with staff and I quickly realized I was in the way. Speaking slurred, I heard one of the ER staff say as the nurse swept the sheet off Dana and set it aside. She was completely naked, not even wearing socks. I blinked as I realized that the 3 men behind me had completely stripped her. There were several wires attached to her, apparently to make sure she was stable during the ride. An older nurse began running her hands over Dana's body, groping her chest on both sides. Another nurse used a damp cloth to wash the abrasion above her right eye. I noticed that no one was going to leave, and looked around to see that all the members of the ambulance crew were just standing around watching the 3 nurses scrutinize Dana from head to toe. A young man came in, lifted one eyelid, then the other, shining a light into them. "Need a CT scan," he said, seemingly to no one in particular, and left. An older nurse looked at me. "Are you her husband?" she asked, getting a nod from me. "Okay. I need you to fill out these papers." She handed me a clipboard and then just pushed me aside and sat me down in one of the chairs. At that moment, one of the ER staff handed me Dana's purse and her clothes in a plastic bag. "It looks like she's going to be okay. They're going to do some scans to make sure. We got a good look at her. Nothing seems to be broken, just a lot of bruising." He grinned and patted me on the shoulder and left. The head nurse pulled out a sheet and covered Dana. I was grateful to her for that, as the room we were in was just a small alcove. There was no wall between it and the main area, and people were going back and forth all over the place. I noticed that there was a curtain that could be pulled, but it didn't look like anyone was going to use it. I knew a lot of them weren't medical personnel, but the place was very busy. I had never been in the trauma center of a major hospital. The place seemed to be in complete chaos. Within seconds, she was wheeled out and wheeled down the hallway as people parted to the sides to make room. I got busy filling out all the forms and finished just as she was brought back in. I handed the charge nurse the paperwork and she took it gratefully. "We'll get the CT scan results back pretty quickly. The doctor will be here soon, too. You can stay with her if you want." I had absolutely no intention of going anywhere. "How are you feeling, dear?" I asked her. "Pretty good. They gave me some kind of shot. It makes me drowsy," muttered Dana. "Are you in any pain?" Yeah, I have a headache, and something hurts in my back down below. She struggled to reach behind her back, at which point a young man in a raincoat entered. Are you in any pain? He asked. She repeated what she had told me, again reaching for her lower back. We gave you an injection to ease the pain. Try not to move, please. Dana nodded and leaned back in her chair. I need to put in a catheter. He looked at me. You're her husband, right? He asked me. I nodded. Okay. He reached for the tubes, then pulled up the sheet, exposing the lower part of her body. He then reached down with his gloved hand and placed his index finger and thumb on either side on Dana's body. I'm sorry. I know this is a little uncomfortable. How are you feeling? Her lower body was still fully exposed. I'm fine. She nodded. He pulled back the sheet, leaned over, and looked at the small bag attached to the catheter. It's already leaking. It's very easy when they're this big. And it's clean too. No blood. That's good. He smirked and walked away. I had already opened my mouth to say something when two nurses and an older man walked in. One nurse lifted the sheet and checked the catheter, while the other wielded the needle in the IV taped to her arm. What are you giving her? I asked. Just fluids. I'm flushing the IV now. She smiled at me. No sign of serious blood. But there is a spot in her rectum. She said to the man I mistook for another doctor who rushed in. He was busy looking at the chart. Has anyone checked it out yet? He asked the nurse. I don't know. The transport told us she had stains in her underwear, but we wanted to get a CT scan quickly because she was slurring her words. The man looked at me. Are you her husband? He asked. Yes. Had she been drinking? No. Any drugs, prescribed or recreational? He sounded stern. No. Are you sure this is important? He looked directly at me as if he didn't believe me. No. Dana doesn't drink or do drugs. Good. Get Jerry back here and let him do his job. I'm going to go read the CAT scans. Be right back. He smiled and left. The same young man came back into the room, put on another pair of gloves. Dana squeezed her eyes shut, and I realized she didn't like it at all. He pulled his finger out and examined it, then wiped the discharge on the test strip. Well, it's clean, he said, not addressing anyone in particular. He then took off his glove and put on a new one. I need you to lift your right leg, he said to Dana. Oh my God, I thought to myself as she lifted her right leg. I knew what was about to happen. Relax, honey, he told her, squeezing his index finger to the knuckles. He wiped his finger again on some small card that I realized was a test strip. Again, I told them I was right, he said to himself. He then made a few marks on the card and hung it back up. Walking over to the bed she was lying on, he pulled back the sheet. No sooner had he left the room than the doctor came back in, followed by two nurses. It was then that I noticed that the entire front of the room was still open and bustling with life. I was so engrossed in what the nurse was doing that I wasn't paying attention. My Dana was lying there, completely naked for anyone who happened to walk by. And there was a string of them. Most were in gowns, but one older man was strutting back and forth. I overheard a small conversation. His wife was in the next section. Two gangster-looking types walked by and rounded the corner. I noticed them looking left and right at each alcove as they walked. I was glad Dana had her back to me as they passed by. It seemed like everyone who worked there just ignored the whole thing. The doctor checked the notes again. Good. He turned to look at me. We have a small hemorrhage in the brain, but it's minor and should go away on its own, without surgery. At least that's what we're hoping for. We'll do another CT scan in a couple hours to be sure. How is she doing otherwise? He asked the head nurse. She's calm. Her condition is stable. Good. Well, let's check. He reached out and pulled the sheet down, exposing her breasts. He placed one hand on her rib cage and applied pressure, causing her to sigh lightly. After feeling up and down, he moved to the other side and repeated the inspection. No sprain, good. Let's get an X-ray of her chest. In fact, let's do a full one. He ordered and left. Dana was wheeled out again. After a half hour or so, I asked the nurse if there was water. She pointed down the hallway where I noticed one of those water coolers, and I went there to get a drink. As I passed the next room, I saw an elderly man standing at the entrance, watching. I looked inside. A heavy woman was lying on her back with her legs spread wide, and the same young orderly was inserting one of her catheters. Her eyes met mine. She blushed, and I quickly averted my gaze and headed further down the hall, blushing. No one here seemed to care about modesty. The younger nurse was getting a drink. I waited my turn. She was pretty and smiled at me. "They certainly don't care about modesty here, do they?" I remarked nonchalantly. "Trauma center. We don't have time for that." "I've noticed that, but some of these people aren't staff." "Yes, family members. We can't keep them out, and if we do, some of them cause scandals, and that causes problems. This hospital is in a disadvantaged area of town. We see a lot of gunshot wounds and stabbings. So we just do our job and try not to disturb them. That's why there are chairs in the trauma rooms." I nodded, pouring myself a drink. "That's why we have so many security personnel. Every time it happens..." She brushed off the phrase. I looked back at the main section and realized there were half a dozen men in uniform. At first, I thought they were police officers. "Which one is yours?" she asked. "Dana, the one in room 102A. "Oh, hit by a car? We see that a lot, and bicyclists get hit all the time, too. Your wife is perfectly fine. She'll be transferred to the ICU tonight. This is Jerry's ward." "Who's Jerry?" "He's the nurse who puts in all the catheters." "All of them?" "Yeah, he likes it." She giggled, looking at me. "He likes it," I thought for a moment. "Yeah, especially the cute ones." She giggled again. "Great," said I. "Well, someone has to. I work in X-ray." "Oh, so you made the ones for Dana?" "Yeah, we call her the rubber lady. We just took them off." "Rubber lady?" That confused me. "We usually give everyone nicknames, but the amount of bruising on her with no broken bones is amazing. I think she was hit pretty hard." "Yeah, I know. I saw it happen." "Bummer," she replied and walked back down the hallway. At that moment, a cart drove down the hallway and a young African woman was lying on it. Her lower body was covered by a towel, and her upper naked body was covered in blood. Heavy breasts overhung her on each side. One of the nurses walked quickly beside her, her hands pressing a large cloth to the woman's right shoulder. "Looks like a gunshot wound. Needs more work." I heard someone say, looking back. The man I knew as Jerry rushed past. I shook my head. I stepped aside as an older woman with a haggard look walked down the hallway and into the next room. Jerry was right behind her, and I saw a man lying there with hoses that seemed to be everywhere. He was naked too, except for the bandages on his stomach. I quickly looked away from the man. It was beginning to look like Jerry was very busy. I went back to the room where Dana was. She was sound asleep. I sat there waiting for hours, occasionally glancing at the monitors and trying to figure out what all those lights meant. Finally, a guy, who I now knew was named Jerry, walked in and smiled at me. "I need to check the catheter again." "Have fun," I said with some sarcasm. He threw me a strange look and then lifted the sheet. He reached out and again pressed his thumb and finger on each side of Dana's body, squeezing it. For some reason, I felt myself blush slightly at this and shook my head. "It's just medics. They see this kind of thing every day, so it's no big deal," I told myself. "No leakage, no blood in the urine. Very good." He threw back the sheet, smiled at me again, and left. I saw that this woke Dana up. She turned her head and looked at me. "Hi, sweetie." She smiled. "Hey, baby. You're doing well. They're going to do a repeat CT scan and move you to the ICU soon." "Good. Why don't you go home and get some sleep? I'll be fine." "I'm not sure I want to leave you alone with this pile for too long," I told her. Why? It seems like half of them have done incomprehensible things to you at one time or another. Just doing their jobs, I guess. I guess. But some of them seem to go overboard. One old man walked by as you lay there with your mouth wide open. I told her. There were a lot more of them than him, but I can't help it. I'm sorry if you're embarrassed. It's nothing like that. They're just doing their job, she said again. Anyway, I feel much better now. I just want to sleep. I noticed she was still a little slurring her words. I saw Jerry walk by. He looked over to me and smiled. I nodded at him. This is the guy that the nurse told me really loves his job, I said to Dana. Oh, the young one? That's the impression I got. He sure takes his time. She giggled. I wasn't sure you understood. Oh, I could tell. She chuckled once more. I had the same feeling as when the cops caught us. Really? I guess that surprises me a little. I figured you weren't too worried since you were sitting there not saying anything. Mostly, I was just worried about you. Besides, I have no idea what they're supposed to do, I told her. At that moment, the doctor walked in. Well, very good news. The cranial bleeding has stopped. The small amount of blood will just dissolve. There are no broken bones except for one broken rib, just a few bruises that will go away in a few days. The cracked rib will cause discomfort. We will give you some medication to ease that. I will have you transferred to another room. We will monitor you for a day or so just in case. Then we'll do one last CT scan to make sure. And you can go home. He turned to leave without waiting for an answer. A few minutes later, Jerry came in. We're transferring your wife to the ICU. Would you like to come with us? Yes, I do. I thought so. Well, let's go. He smiled at me and got the cart ready, then rolled it out of the room and rolled down the hallway. I looked into the main room. There were people sitting in front of monitors everywhere. No one even looked up. We went through a few doors. Then he rolled into a room. The door closed behind us. I need to move you from the cart to the bed, he told her, pulling them against each other and reaching down to lock the wheels. He helped Dana over to the bed, pulling the top sheet off of her, and then held the sheet up for her to slip under and lay down. I'll be back in a few minutes to remove the catheter, he said, moving the roller stand with the IVs and wires into place next to the bed. I sat down in the chair next to her and reached out to take her hand. You really need to go home and get some rest, honey. I wouldn't miss it for the world. I'm starting to relax and feel better. It's obvious now that you're going to be okay, I told her. Besides, I want to see how many other people show up to make you uncomfortable. I grinned, trying to keep a happy tone in my voice. Oh, God. She blushed and giggled. I'm starting to think you might be jealous for nothing, she teased. It was only a few minutes later when Jerry came back into the room. I'm just about to remove the catheter. It's going to be a little uncomfortable for a few seconds, but it'll pass. Let me know if you feel any pain. Okay. Dana looked at me, then at the ceiling. Then she squeezed her eyes shut. Jerry pulled the sheet up to her waist, and I could see the tiny hose coming out of her body. I don't see how you can get that thing in there at all, I said. Sometimes it sticks a little bit, so we'll just twist it a little bit to make it easier to extract. He grinned and twisted it gently. Dana's eyelids fluttered slightly, but she didn't move. He took the tube out, rolled it up and put it in a bag, sealed it, and put it in the container. He stood for a second looking at her, then looked at me. I don't know what expression was on my face, but I couldn't help but feel a tingle in my loins from him touching and looking at my wife like that. Sometimes it can be painful or uncomfortable. Do you want me to give you a massage? It might help, he asked. I saw a smirk appear on his face. Dana's eyes opened and she looked at me. I didn't say anything back, not quite sure what Jerry meant. Okay, I guess so, she said, closing her eyes again. Jerry put a glove on her right hand and started massaging the underside of Danny's body. I just sat there stunned, not knowing what to say. But I had a suspicion that this wasn't normal. There, now it's okay. Jerry took off his glove, gathered his gear, and left. The whole thing didn't take 3 minutes. This is making my ribs hurt, Dana chuckled. I never would have believed you would let yourself do something like that if I hadn't seen it myself, I told her. I sat there very embarrassed, more embarrassed than ever. It made me feel even more embarrassed. 2 days later, she was discharged with instructions to take it easy. She still had bruises on her sides and arms, but aside from a rapidly healing black eye, she seemed fine. For a couple weeks, Dana and I went back to our normal lives. The first change I noticed was that she bought shorts and started wearing them around the house along with a t-shirt and no bra. Dana almost never went without a bra, and she also never wore shorts, preferring slacks or blue jeans at home and dresses in public. It was summer and warm, so I didn't think too much about it. It was weird, though. The next thing I noticed was that she always wanted me to touch her a certain way, using my thumb and index finger. I remembered watching a male nurse doing what I now knew were liberties, and it never failed to make me horny. At first I was uncomfortable and slightly ashamed of my own reaction, but then I was able to accept that it was just a fantasy. I also realized that Dana had fantasies too. I wondered if she ever thought about the incident, but I never asked. Our sex life seemed to have increased. Whereas before we had sex on average once or even twice a week, now it was every other day. A few times we had sex twice in the same day, and I can't say I was against it. It was just different. A lot of things were different about my Dana now. One very hot day, I caught her working in the backyard. She was on her hands and knees pulling weeds. I saw that our neighbor Sonny was working on his property and paying much more attention to Dana than his weeds. I realized why when she turned to walk down the next row, and I saw her beautiful breasts clearly outlined in the huge gash of the top she wore. I made some iced tea and walked out to her. She looked up and gratefully accepted the drink, sweat pouring off her in rivulets. She then set it down and went back to pulling weeds. Both of her breasts were visible, beautiful round ones swaying back and forth. "You're about to give Sonny a heart attack, honey," I told her, noticing that he immediately went back inside when he saw me. She lowered her gaze, then grinned, but made no move to cover herself. "I guess I show a lot, huh? I hope he likes them." She only chuckled, then went back to pulling weeds. This incident made me blink. It wasn't normal at all. One Saturday, I had to run to our store, and I told Dana she didn't have to go. It was 4 hours before I got everything fixed and headed home. I found Dana, Sonny, and his wife Catherine in the backyard. Sonny was sitting sideways in a lawn chair talking to the women, both of them lying on their backs, naked as jaybirds. Catherine was a pretty but slightly overweight blonde with huge round breasts that seemed to have been enlarged as they didn't sag in the slightest. She was completely shaved and didn't seem the least bit embarrassed about it. She just smirked at me as she put her legs out over the edge of the lawn chair. This surprised me, since they had been our neighbors for almost 2 years, and the most I had seen her in was shorts and halter tops, and only once in a bikini. Catherine had a slight bulge at the waist, so I never really paid attention to it. At least Sonny was wearing swim trunks, and I also noticed that both girls were shiny and smeared with sunscreen. "Sonny was kind enough to put oil on us so we wouldn't get burned." Dana smiled at me, catching my gaze. There was only one way to get oil where I could clearly see that it was there. Did that mean she let Sonny? "I see nothing is missing," said I with some sarcasm. The very thought of it irritated me. "No, we didn't mean to burn anything." Both women glanced over and giggled. Also, she didn't seem to care at all about the fact that she was lying without her swimsuit in front of them with my appearance. Then it came to me that she was drinking a cold beer, and Dana wasn't. Not normal at all. The next week I called and made an appointment for her, getting a referral to a clinic that specialized in head injuries and various reactions to them. The doctor we were referred to was a middle-aged Oriental man. He listened as I talked at length about the accident that had happened a few months ago, and what I had noticed in my wife since the incident. Dana didn't object to being examined. In fact, I expected her to. The doctor made me wait in an outer office while he performed the exam, and after 2+ hours, I was starting to get frustrated. Finally, he invited me into the office. Dana was sitting there with a smile on her face. As far as I can tell from the medical records and what I can see, we have a case of PCS. PCS. What is that exactly? I asked. It's post-concussion syndrome, and it can manifest as anything from wild headaches and dizziness to unexplained personality changes. What does that mean for us? I think your wife had underlying sexual problems, and the minor concussion and brain injury she suffered is now manifesting itself as a much more relaxed attitude towards sexuality. I don't quite understand that, I told him. We don't understand it either. There are so many mysteries in the human mind that all we can do is see the results and try to deal with them. So you're saying my conservative wife has turned into a pervert? I asked. Not only that, I'm afraid. He looked at Dana, she looked at him, then at me, and smiled. Then she shrugged her shoulders. She crossed her legs at the knees, and I saw the top one start to move back and forth, a sign I knew very well. What do you mean by more? I asked. I think you'd have to be a very busy boy to keep up with her. Your wife's current sexual urges are pretty strong, plus she seems to have some specific desires. He smiled at me. Specific desires? What kind of specific desires? Dana will explain it. She says you two have a very good rapport, so I think it's for the best. Will things go back to normal in the end? We just don't know. Maybe. In the meantime, the only thing you both can do is adjust. Time will tell. Hey, that's not so bad. If you just relax and enjoy each other, you'll be fine. Dana is good and healthy. He smiled at me, we shook hands, and Dana and I walked out to the car. She put her hand on my shoulder. I hope you're not mad, she said. Why would I be angry? I just can't help myself. Please take me home and hurry up. Her hand came up and stroked my body. I shook my head. Maybe the doctor was right. Maybe I would be a busy boy. I want you to touch me like this again. I really need it, she said. Okay. I realized what she meant. As soon as we got home, we made love. Afterward, she pressed herself against me, as if trying to become a part of me. A few more hours would pass, and she would completely exhaust me. I wanted to ask her. I wanted to know. I had to ask, and I did. Point blank. Have you been with anyone but me since the accident? I asked her. You mean sex? No, of course not. I know you'll take care of me, so I'm waiting. What do you mean by waiting? Well, sometimes it's pretty hard to do, but I manage, like when Dr. She fell silent. The doctor? That last doctor? What was he doing? Oh, just running some tests to see how I'd react. You mean he touched you? Sure, but he's the doctor, so I guess it's okay. Besides, you're much better at it. Better? I don't think I'm following. He just needed to know what I was reacting to in order to understand the reason. He even apologized afterwards. He apologized? For what? For touching me like that and saying that you and I need to talk too. Talk? Sure, you and I can talk about anything. Yeah, I know. Well, I was wondering, do you think you could learn how to put one of those catheters in me? She blushed slightly at that question. A catheter? Why would you want to do that? Oh. I sighed, finally realizing that the doctor seemed to be right. I was going to be a very busy boy. The end. Subscribe to my channel. Thank you.